Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's really wonderful to be here, to be part of this exhibition and this whole gathering. Yesterday was a very interesting day. We had a lot of amazing panelists. So I really thank Royal Enfield and UNESCO for putting together this forum and really creating a very vibrant kind of conversation and bringing people together, different kinds of stakeholders that can kind of come together and think about this question of intangible cultural heritage. So today we're actually we're starting the second day of these programs with a discussion with contemporary practitioners and researchers who are working in the region. They're coming from Ladakh and from Meghalaya and Assam. Uh, and are very much embedded in those contexts, are working in those contexts, both doing research as well as creative practices. So I'm very, very honored and happy to share this forum with all of them, and I really look forward to a conversation. Um, and I think, we're really trying to think about the role that contemporary practitioners and researchers are playing today in terms of engaging and thinking about the question of culture and cultural heritage, and what are the kind of terms of engagement that are being negotiated, and thinking around words like tradition and contemporaneity, or even other associated words of innovation, conservation, sustainability, even hybridity and contamination. I mean, these are all words that are kind of swirling around this idea of how we might explore cultural heritage, or what it can speak to. So I just wanted to start. I'll indulge myself and speak for a few minutes. But I think I wanted to sort of signpost one, this very interesting anthropologist and thinker, an important thinker called Tim Ingold. And Ingold has done very important work on materiality, and but also really trying to help us rethink fundamental categories, concepts and epistemologies that which he does with the way that he researches and thinks through ideas that are coming to him from so-called primitive societies or indigenous societies, tribal communities. So one of the things that he would ask us to think about is rethinking how we might consider, say, categories of nature versus culture. One sort of being biological and pre-existing, out there, and the other being social and man-made. And he would instead, say that maybe we don't need to think in these binaries. Maybe we can think in terms of temporal interlockings, where the human, the animal, the plant, the animate and the inanimate environment, all of them are kind of locked together. And this is, of course, happening in a certain time, and there is a temporality to it, there is a velocity to it. Uh, so we're not seeing things in kind of individuation, or people as kind of, or like thinking of individual entities. So he has this very beautiful description about, what is a tree? Tree is a tree, and an object. Is the bird on the tree? The tree is the roots and the fungus and the mycelium that are growing underneath the tree. Is the wind that shapes the branches? Is that the tree? So how do you sort of define this object called the tree? And instead of thinking of it as these separate entities, one might think of these kind of knots, and consider knots that are sort of like, all of us are sort of entangled in these knots, and these knots are sort of spaces from which various threads are kind of flowing out. And I think yesterday, when we saw the kind of discussion that was happening around the question of cultural heritage, ecologies, even these different disciplines of, say, somebody coming from the tourism industry, or coming from research, or I think there was a way that, there you could see the way that all of these people were talking about that. They were not talking about isolated phenomena of this versus that, but really thinking about these interlockings and about this kind of knots that we're representing. And so I just wanted to place that. And then when we think of entanglements, and we think of cultural heritage or culture, or the natural, or our own existence within these knots, then it becomes about the terms of engagement. How do these knots get unraveled? How do they get mobilized? Where do the knots connect with other things? I think these are the kind of conversations that become really important and interesting to have with this group of panelists. Um, I remember seeing an exhibition at the IIC with one Ladakhi artist who Motup will know, Tashi Morup. And he works a lot with Ladakhi folklore, makes these very beautiful paintings. And he had this one text, one painting which was kind of based on a folklore song, which says that, and I just wanted to read the lines where, so the poem goes like this, the song goes like this, that if the white glacier doesn't freeze over the high mountain pastures, how shall the turquoise-hued lake thrive in the lower valleys? If the turquoise-hued lake doesn't thrive in the lowlands, where will the sandalwood sprout? If the sandalwood doesn't sprout, where shall the king of the birds perch? If the king of the birds doesn't perch on it, then who will sing different melodies? And if no one sings in different melodies, then how will the beloved be amused? So I mean, this sense of things which are flowing in one into the other, and I mean, would this be defined as this is both in terms of natural phenomena, but these are also uh, ways that people's lives have meanings and cultural expressions come from this, right? So, and I think, and just to speak about this, I think yesterday also it was very interesting in the panel with Eric and Bidisha and Ritu when they were actually telling us a little bit about the whole project and what this intangible cultural heritage mapping exercise will be. Um, it was also interesting to think about how it seemed very open-ended in a way, this exercise of listing and identifying cultural heritage. Because as Eric, who's the head of UNESCO, was telling us that, obviously there are these categories, but they don't necessarily get listed or officially recognized that easily. So, I mean, it's not just about thinking about some form getting an international recognition or being put on the map in as something that is, of worth having some value in that sense, but really thinking about what this exercise of listing, how will it actually be uh, mobilized, and the biker community could do it in a certain way and others could do it in a certain way. So it also becomes about these questions of engagement, and these are very active, urgent questions in terms of what practices are being brought to the forefront, mobilized to what end, through which means, for whom. I think these questions become very, very important. So I think with that, I also want to think about this exhibition because I am a curator and I love exhibitions. I find them extremely, unpredictable and charged spaces where all kinds of different um, objects, arguments are being presented. And I think this is a wonderful setting in the way that, there are both unexpected and sometimes planned kinds of outcomes of exhibitions. So perhaps I want to start with Mary Therese Kurkalang, who has curated one part of the exhibition, the soil and sky. Uh, and I really wanted to maybe discuss with her, thinking about how this project came together. Mary is a curator and a social researcher, and she's been spent many years in Delhi working in various arts organizations and also in the publishing sector. And then she moved 5 years back, and but she keeps shuttling between Delhi, Shillong, and since 2012, actually, she's been working with artists and creative practitioners and social workers from the Northeast, and really creating platforms and creating terms of their inclusion within exhibitions or within various forums, working with them. And since 2021, she's the festival director of the Shillong Literary Festival. So, Mary, perhaps you could begin this conversation and tell us about the way that you have constructed this dialogue within the brief of ICH. And yeah.
Thank you, Vidya. A couple of words are staying with me from what you just shared. One of them is swirl. The other is when you quoted the anthropologists and that of the communities that you spoke about. Um, I think when we're looking at our region, the Northeast, there is just so much to think of that has not been articulated, that is not known. Um, and so therefore, for me, I think, I shifted to Delhi in 1997. I've sort of grown up here in a way. I spent a lot of time with different international cultural organizations. And I think that also helped me discover my identity in this country. What does it mean to be from the region that I come from? And I think that I also discovered many new identities, which is that I'm not just that one tribal community that my mother belongs to, but that, that I started seeing this map very differently. I started seeing Seven Sisters and the eight states that make Northeast. And along with that, I also started seeing the borders that surrounded it. Each state in this Northeast has an international border or more, and all of the influences that sort of transfers from one end to the other. And then our relationship, beyond this chicken neck with the rest of this country, from in terms of policy and relationships, what has flowed in, what was not allowed to flow out. So many things. So therefore, I feel this. I never wanted to be a representative of my culture. I shied away from it. I was afraid of it because I felt, and I continue to feel that I do not understand it. It's only always a learning for me. Within my own state, within my own history, within the rest of the different states in the Northeast, I'm only trying to understand always. And the awareness that there's so much still that, that I could spend a lifetime trying to understand, and there will still be much more. So when I'm asked to represent, to curate, to add to a narrative of the Northeast, my central thing is how do I begin to tell the story that I don't know myself? And therefore, it's also this that, I've come to learn in life for everything really, that what is truth? Truth can only be so many multiplicities. And that the more perspectives we add to it, perhaps the truth will get bigger. And in the context of this cultural heritage, what is culture for us? What is culture for me in what I do and how I practice? And I look at the lessons I've learned from the culture that I come from, and I think about, so one of the sites that have just become a UNESCO site in India are the living root bridges. I went there when I was a very, very young child, and I still remember walking to the first living root bridge with my mother, who only always walked barefoot. She was illiterate. And it was just so, it stays with me, For me, it was like a moment of God. That when she explained the living root bridge to me, it was this tree and how the roots are intertwined, and actually the people who create that bridge, which is to cross rivers, to be able to cross very steep cliffs so that you don't fall down. There are different kinds. It's not only to cross rivers, it's also to get across to mountains. There are many, many kinds of living root bridges. But this whole idea that it takes generations to create this strong bridge that can hold people safely, to live with nature, with all of these different elements of nature, and to be safe. And the generation that builds it is actually not the generation that uses it, it's the next generation that uses it. So there's a kind of responsibility. And I think, in terms of how I think of my culture and our relationship with land, it's never about ownership, it's about custodianship. How do we keep it? I don't like to use the word preserve. I think, how do we live with it that it'll be good enough for everyone else in the future too. So everything really, in terms of how we look at our cultures in the region, it's that we use the environment, we use nature as metaphor for life, philosophy. And our tales are really dark, A lot of our folk tales are very, very dark. There's so much element of death and murder, and there's dark magic in it. And I've always been very fascinated by the fact that our tales are so dark. And that, nature sort of, and nature is always used as metaphor, so there's this very, very famous waterfall in Meghalaya called Nauka Likai. It literally translates to where Likai jumped. It was a point where this person committed suicide, and there's this beautiful waterfall. And every monsoon, as you know, we're the rainiest state, this waterfall just flows. And maybe that also, in terms of where we are right now and our relationship with the environment. It is all of these ways in which maybe our ancestors, our stories have told us that it's never going to be easy. How are we going to live with it? So, when I was thinking of like, what does intangible culture mean? It means so many things, and perhaps there is elements of what is tangible that creates the intangible, and it is a constant swirl. It is never, never stationary. And when I'm trying to then now create, and which is why some of the works that you see, and not all things that you can see that are tangible, but also like yesterday we went through a tasting journey of the Himalayas, where the way we live is actually our everyday life. It's the past and the present and the future and all of our mixed identities together. So there are three works that you'll see, and then there's a weave that is hanging there, the Apatani weave. And how I thought about it was, I wanted to represent, because this is about documentation of ICH practices by travelers to our range. And I thought, what is that story that I would really like to tell them? And sort of in a way to open little windows to the understanding of our world, our mountains, our environment. So, which is why I took like these works. One is, and also in terms of how it's placed, there's one which is on the ground level, and it is about our land, our soil. And actually, what you don't see in the installation, which is Kriya's installation, is actually there's silk which holds that. And because it's precious, that soil, that land that we have. And Kriya will tell you much more about her work. And then we go on to Dipankar's work. He works with the missing community, his community. Dipankar is here. Dipankar, I don't see you. There's Dipankar. And Dipankar belongs to the missing communities, and he's a trained artist. And, I love that work, because for me it is like that nothing, the concept of waste doesn't exist, because it's all, this earth is home and everything in it has a circle. It swirls and it has different, avatars to it. And so what that work is that, when clothes have been worn and worn and worn and they become rags, how are those rags then used again? And so they're woven into what you see, the gunny sacks or different ways of weaving it, and they become mattresses and blankets. And the elements that the bunker is added to it is actually because the missing community has always lived along the water, the river, and what is this new so much material that we have which is waste, and it's plastic. So there's also now what he's introduced to it is to go back to that weaving method, but to also use all of the plastic that you find in the rivers and the land, and to weave it back into something that we can use. So it's not recycle, it's just really like finding a new usage for it. And then there's Yawan's work from Sikkim. And so, from the soil up, we go up, because there is that relationship between what goes into the soil and our relationship with the spiritual. And that mound is, the mound that actually is the deity of all of Sikkim. It unites it. So this is how I sort of imagine this curation, to actually give you a little glimpse into the many, many things that we are. For me, an anthropologist that really, really sort of influenced me in terms of understanding my own region, my culture, and like I said, it's a constantly ongoing journey, is James Scott. He's written this book called The Art of Not Being Governed. And I think that is like, from where we come from. It is our philosophy that, we've only always struggled from settling and being governed in the ways that maybe, civilization was understood. And we traveled, we did not own land, and we learned how to live, and we never thought of ourselves as people who could rule the land, but rather that we would live along with the land, everything was swirling and continues to swirl. And I will end on that note.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I know. I think this question also of responsibility and custodianship also came through yesterday when I was watching the film of the log drums being made, and I think even in the speakers. So again, I mean, it's again a term that we might rethink about what it means to actually uh, be part of a cultural landscape or a natural landscape. And Tashi, maybe I can turn to you, and because this part of the exhibition, which is curated by Monisha Ahmed from LAMO, and that's the Ladakh Arts and Media Organization, where Tashi Morup also works and is a researcher there, project officer there. And Mary's intervention, which is also uh, in some ways through the lens of contemporary practitioners, which is also very interesting. And here there is a way that some of the historical material, of course, there are also contemporary artists like Motup and others. But perhaps you could tell us a little bit about this. And again, thinking about this question of borders as well, the way that Mary was talking about it, and how certain places in within the Indian nation state become like endpoints or border lines, but actually have other histories of being extremely important transit zones, which I think somewhere the exhibition refers to. So
Sure.
perhaps.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to congratulate all of us to have this event here in this wonderful setting. And it's all happened so suddenly that we can't really believe ourselves that this is happening at such a juncture, at such a time, crucial time, that we really need this. The process of documenting the intangible cultural heritage that we all have and share in Ladakh, in Northeast, everywhere. So I'm so delighted to share this space to be able to express some of my thoughts, which is really cluttered somewhere here, but it's in such short time I don't know whether I'd be able to express it properly. But let's start with telling about the exhibition that we have put up here. It's all, as we have said, it's curated by Monisha Ahmed. Monisha has been working in Ladakh for so many years. She did her PhD from Ladakh, working on textiles in Ladakh, in the eastern part of Ladakh. So it's so many years, and then all the effort that she's putting back into Ladakh to put together things and get together people and work in a space, interesting space that we have in the old town of Leh, the historical Leh Palace below. Just below the Leh Palace, we have our center in a 5 years old heritage building. It's called Ladakh Arts and Media Organization. So this exhibition has come from there. So starting with that panel where we have a set of 4 paintings, by artist, very young, very talented artist Jigme Dangmo. She has particularly highlighted one very intricate aspect of Ladakh's life, cultural, life, which also takes us back to the prehistoric or pre-Buddhist culture that we call Bon tradition, wherein we have this something called Lato. Lato is the altar for the gods that we, have in our community, protector gods for the community and for the family. Every mountain has a spirit, and just behind me, Mutup's painting. In a way, I kind of understand that this is the offering, the tradition that we have in Ladakhi culture. So there's this culture of offering is so embedded in our culture that it is because the existence of this, not just the human beings, the human settlements that we see in the natural surrounding, but also 2 other realms, which is one of the gods And that's what she's depicted so nicely in this natural setting, the altar, the lato, and also the world of subterranean creatures, subterranean spirits called nagas or the Lu. So we have gods, the La, then human, then the Lu. So these three things are very a part and parcel of our life, and we have so many rituals around it. Our culture is sort of weaved around it, and then we have the history of how the three diffusions of Buddhism in Tibet, and before Buddhism even went into Tibet, we had Buddhism which is already there from the Kashmir side. So that is sort of the history of the culture, how it from the transition from the prehistoric born tradition into Buddhism, and then um, uh, then this sort of a journey that the historical journey that we have tried to sort of represent in this small setting yet, but it's not complete though, because we also have in Ladakh the prehistorical petroglyphs, the rock carvings, the rock arts, which goes back to say the Bronze Age, Iron Age petroglyphs. So it's Ladakh is one of the highest concentration of petroglyphs in the whole world. So I'm just trying to bring out some of the bits of the history to just tell that how it's not. And also, Ladakh's been traversed and traveled by so many travelers, explorers, adventurers in the recent times, also in the past, also. So, because we often in the tourism, whenever tourism came into being in Ladakh, uh, it has got a new definition, new identification relating to Ladakh, such as Ladakh is very remote, tucked away, isolated. But if you look at the history, if you look at the frequency of the travelers and the exchanges and all sorts of events that took place in the history, Ladakh's never been isolated. It's always been frequented and very richly frequented. Very intense frequency of travelers and all kinds of activities that were taking place in Ladakh. So that's how we have tried to sort of put those things onto this panel, wherein in this first section we have the traveler's history, and then Ladakh's vast terrain and the vastness of it also demands a lot of mobility. So mobility is also it's part of our culture. Uh, and that's how its material culture also developed, because of this terrain, the demand of the the legwork which is needed in the sheer geography of Ladakh. Then, of course, coming to this panel, we have the Alchi section, wherein this is one small interesting event in the history where 30 artists from Kashmir were hired to do this wonderful work in this temple of Alchi. And then here we have the Eastern Ladakh section where we have the migration of yak. So it's altogether a different sort of a zone in Ladakh, which it's a vast pasture where you have the Changpa nomads. And they have this tradition of moving from one pasture to another in seasonal migration that take place and the changes that we see today. And then we have the textile section. So this is the small exhibition we have been able to bring in here in this short time of announcement of this event. So and then I'll talk about the rest, other things later. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is this sense of also this landscape, which is, of course, it's got its own magnificence and qualities that cannot be ignored, even just in terms of how one would live there. But also this idea of transit and the way that people are moving through the landscape, and the way that the landscape is also, constantly changing or so and even this panel, I think it's quite interesting the way that you're thinking about weaving in a kind of larger framework of, where the sheep are being reared, and then the yarn is being made, is being woven. And so trying to think of it in a kind of larger context. So yeah, I mean, for me, this whole exhibition also becomes very interesting in the way that these different kinds of interventions are taking place from contemporary artists, thinking about historical material also in the present moment, why these researches become important and what they're telling us about regions today. These are not disinterested researches happening necessarily. But perhaps I could talk to Motup and Kriya, who are both showing works here, and maybe start with uh, uh, whose work is actually the star panel in a sense, and is going to be in every video of all the panelists talking, and also kind of presenting quite a, I mean, in the sense of the title, the idea of the offering becomes very much something that is part and parcel of Ladakhi culture, but there is another kind of narrative that he's also thinking about when you see the figures. So I don't know, Motu, maybe you want to share something about the work, and also maybe thinking about a little bit about this exhibition within which the work is embedded. So it's the narrative is
Right.
being presented here also. Anything that comes to your mind.
Yeah. Um, Thanks, Vidya. I think I would like to talk about the whole exhibition via also explaining about my own journey. Um, I think that in itself will explain the whole process. Just like any other Ladakhi, I've also gone out from my own place to study outside because, you know, since everybody was sending their kids outside to study, I was also one of them. And then, uh, and then living outside for more than 15 years has made me question my own identity. Um, that's also because I went to South India, and that's when I realized that how different I am from any other people from the mainland. And uh, yeah, and there was a lot of racial othering and things like that happened, and it was a very hard time for me to stay outside, and a lot of longing and nostalgia that happened in the time. So while pursuing my art, I think the whole idea of this identity and the whole other associated ideas were just naturally coming into my work. And then when I realized that I am trying to find an answer to the whole thing that is happening psychologically, so in one of the process, I found out that so I was into a very Buddhist school where there's this idea of offering to the gods three things: flour, incense, and fire. Fire. So it is that idea that has been represented in terms of these three portrait. Also wearing different kind of clothes, which is very day-to-day life popular clothes that you're wearing. So with the sweater, I'm trying to represent Ladakh just in terms of an idea that when you see a sweater, you think of a cold place. And for me, South India, how I want to depict is via a shirt because I've seen a lot of people wearing shirts. So that's how I would want to represent myself from that side. And the third one is t-shirt because I constantly visit Delhi and it's a very hot place. So that way I wanted to switch these three things together. And it is, mm, yeah, it is not a nice painting because it has a very dark humor attached to it. It talks about like I'm being the host in the mainland and I'm offering to you my stereotypical food. So that's the underneath layer to it. Yes, apart from that, when I went back home, so there were these lot of terminologies that was around in terms lots to do with tradition, lots to do with culture, and people around were just saying about this is not our culture, this is not our tradition, and so on. I think, and that made me reflect on to those words. And in my and I was also like very much around like anthropology, archaeologies, and it helped me think in terms of my own work. And with the current practice, I'm also looking at the journey that Ladakh has been through within the Trans-Himalayan range, and currently how the popular objects started to come in one's house, and how that is shaping and molding one's culture and identity. So yeah.
Priya, would you like to share something? And Priya is a designer. She's been working a lot with bamboo, and
Thank
has
you,
this
Vidya.
deep, loving relationship with it, and lives in a beautiful forest, which
Yeah.
I'm very jealous about, even just thinking about it from her
Well,
installation.
you're welcome to come and visit it.
I'm coming. So, yeah, so maybe you could tell us, I'm coming from a design background, a project design background,
Yeah.
how you're sort of thinking about it.
So, I'm amongst people who are conserving, preserving history, culture, and there's me who has the story of land as a personal connect. So it's more of finding my belongingness and also my identity. Like Motup said, like he was also sent to study. So was I. Like I think all of us coming from small towns, we are sent away to study and achieve something. So that happened to me as well. And I come from a multicultural family, so I still struggling with that belongingness as to whether am I a Bengali or whether am I a Khasi. So who am I? So when I go back to Meghalaya, I really don't fit into the Khasi culture. I'm not necessarily Bengali as well. I don't appear as one. And I mean, some of my friends are here, and I don't think I've ever strongly come across as somebody who's come from Meghalaya to them as well. I've just been Cami to them in my whatever simplicity or complications. So when I moved back home 7 years back, when I had my daughter, she was born here in Delhi. I've been in Delhi for almost 15 years. And that was the time when I wanted to work with my hands. I knew that product design for me, working from a closed space, from an office space, doing technical drawings, and was not working out for me. I just wanted to get my hands on a material. And then my parents, they had this farmland in the low hills of Meghalaya. And that was the time when I saw material in its naturalness, like just the way it is. Just standing there under that bamboo grove and smelling it and being empowered by it. Just what will I do with this material? Because I've seen people do so much with it in the rural areas of Northeast. I mean, houses are built. I mean, we are completely dependent on bamboo in the Northeast. But I was also coming from this stubborn attitude of a designer that I don't want to do what everybody's doing. So then I said, okay, so I have to find my own recipes now. So I said, okay, let me approach this from a very small setup. Like, so I don't know what I'm going to do. So I don't want to build an infrastructure. I don't want to say I need this machine, that machine to work with it. I'm just going to go ahead and let's chop one piece of bamboo and let's see what happens. And then I always say that my craft is new, but at the same time, I know it's rooted in traditions and culture because I am applying all those, the knowledge of the land. So I'm treating my bamboo naturally. I'm using the forest. I want my bamboo to smell of the forest, to feel the forest, to tell the story of the forest. And I want that my work doesn't speak of the design that I do, but of this material that has somehow shaped the person and the designer that I am today. So constantly, I mean, my approach has always been that I start working from the material rather than imposing my design on it. So starting off with a sketch and saying, let's go and find the material now and fit the sketch to that material. I decided to work in the reverse way. And so I pick up a piece of bamboo and I see its size, whatever that I get, and with that I work my designs through it. And all throughout, I've always just tried to just show people the beauty of bamboo from within. That its nodes, its textures, its smell, and just its inherent beauty, and not deconstruct it in any way. So That's why you'll see like none of my work has any weaves in it, and I have not like really cut and chopped the bamboo into pieces and deconstructed it, but actually used it in its wholesomeness. And in doing this, I've also found that I can't really call myself essentially just a bamboo designer, but I'm so influenced and inspired by my forest home where I live right now, and also by my daughter, whom I've raised for 7 years in this forest home. Her curiosity has also like made me so curiosity driven that when I walk into the forest, I know that it's not just going to be the bamboo that I see. I know that the grass will be as important to me, and I want to do something with it. I'm collecting like cicada. I don't know if anybody knows cicada, this insect that makes this crazy sound in the forest. So I find them dead. I collect the wings. I'm collecting stones. I'm collecting twigs. I'm collecting mushrooms. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but I know I find it like so fascinating, these living materials. And the fact that we should celebrate them in their as they are in their with their inherent beauty, rather than trying to deconstruct them and process them into something else, you know. So that's just been my approach of work. And I found that in this journey I have understood my land, you know. And so now the question is, do I belong there? I mean, is that what I will call home? So then this has just occurred recently because I know that I will be moving from one space to another space. So then I said, no, this is just not my, I mean, you know, just home for me, because I will continuously be moving, and maybe I will find home somewhere else where there is nature, where there is land, where there are materials, these living materials. I will find a sense of belongingness there. So that for me also, I find that in terms of like intangible cultural heritage that we are talking about here, that I think culture also, as we talk about it, like preserving the traditions, the histories, it's also about evolving, no? Like there's so much like in our life today, there's so many things that are influencing it. So how do we in today, how do we evolve that? Like, for example, even the traditional practices of processing bamboo, processing material, textile, how do we in the today, in the present day, with whatever that is around, what can we do? I mean, what recipes do we bring to evolve it further, you know, while preserving it at the same time? So we are growing together with it, you know. We are lending ourselves into it. So in this also, in this process, I also found that I was doing something. I said, so I'm working from the reverse way, like I'm working from the material to the design. Is there a term, something like that? So I quickly went to Google. Also working in isolation, you know, alone from a forest land where nobody really understands. Your family is looking at you and like, you're totally crazy. All day you're just rubbing and touching bamboo, and you're the bamboo lady of the family. So nobody's really going to answer any of my questions besides saying that I'm mad. So a quick Google research tells me that there's something called material-driven design. So that's when I found that, okay, there's something like this as well, you know. So I think I am also discovering my process and finding meaning to it and finding purpose in what I do. And I have just brought my forest here today, you know, to tell the story, to share its beauty, its smells, its textures with all of you. And that I feel that even if I go to Ladakh, you know, maybe I will find something over there where which I will connect. And maybe from that connect, I will be able to connect with the people, you know. I will have that I don't come there with the curiosity of knowing what are Ladakhis, what do they do, what do they eat, what is this that they wear, you know. But I will just have this direct connect first with the land and just, you know, feel it with like, I'm all about tactility, you know. So, and then maybe I will be able to connect much more with the people around. So I'm coming from this perspective, Vidya. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I think our last speaker in this panel, Noor Jahan, and as we have been talking so much about these different journeys that, I mean, all of them have also made, gone away, come back, you know, looking at things from the inside and the outside. The whole paradigm of conservation is something that we might consider as something that, you know, I mean, even just trying to think about how conservation might be looked at within this, which is about sort of freezing something or sort of preserving it in its kind of condition. And maybe Noor can share a little bit. She has a PhD in the subject and has her own. She set up her own consultancy, which is called Tsering Ladakh. She's also an ice hockey player, national level, which is quite amazing. And so I don't know. I mean, perhaps Noor, you could share a little bit about the conservation practice. Of course, in a materially fragile and ecologically fragile landscape of Ladakh, and there is a lot of conservation. I know so many people who are working on it. Um, and yeah, so perhaps you could share a little bit about the whole process.
Sure, Vidya. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to UNESCO and Royal Enfield for this opportunity. Uh, Before coming to the conservation aspect, I would like to tell my story in a chronological order, just to give you an understanding of how I came into the field, and in a field that is really, like, not very well known, a profession that is completely unknown to the region. And so, like, when I was growing up, my mother is from Nubra Valley and my father is from Leh. And growing up, so every summer or during winter holidays, we had this thing that we would go to see my grandfather in Nubra. And to visit his house from the main road, there is one small path. And within this path, a lot of stupas, these religious structures, they come. And there are these particular stupas through which you can pass. These are pathway stupas. And it's called Kagan Churten. And there was this particular one that I would always look up to. And, whenever you look up, there are paintings on the ceiling. And I remember every year I went, I saw some deterioration, in that stupa. So as a child, I would notice some changes. Sometimes, it had paintings on textile. This is what I realized later. And I saw this process, something was happening to that. And like Motup said earlier, and Kriya mentioned too, coming from a small place where education is definitely given priority, my parents also expected me to, at some point leave Ladakh and go somewhere out and study and, become something great and come back. I had no idea what I wanted in life. I was playing ice hockey as well, so I didn't want to leave at all. And and somehow I managed. After 10th, usually it's mandatory that you have to leave Ladakh. But then somehow I managed. I even convinced my parents to let me go to the government school and then study there. And they got convinced eventually. But my ulterior motive was to play ice hockey. And then I had taken commerce, but there was this connection to your roots, like somehow, because I grew up in a place where, culture, heritage, all of these terms are given a lot of weightage. And you always hear people telling about, this is your culture, that is your heritage. Did not really know what exactly they meant, but then there was something. And eventually 12th, I had to give my 12th exam, and then I had to move out of Ladakh. I was studying commerce, so I came to Delhi University. I got enrolled in one of the colleges here, and I was doing BCom, something that I could not relate to at all. So 3 years I was really, in a place where I did not know what I wanted to become, what I was doing in life. Yes, life in Delhi was interesting. It was different from where I came from. But, there was a lot of I really had no idea what was going on with my life. So one summer holiday, this was my third year in college, and one summer holiday, that particular year, I went back home. And I was walking in Old Town, where we have the palace, and there are these really nice alleys and then historic buildings, and somehow I came across a group of people who were doing some conservation work in there. There is this one temple called Chambalakhang, and there was some conservation work going on. I just out of curiosity, I just looked inside the temple, and there were a group of foreigners who were doing some work inside. And for me, that was really intriguing. And I went in and then, asked a few questions. I was very shy, but I managed to utter out some questions. And, they told me there is this profession called art conservation. and like, you could, there is like, I mean, they were talking about, they were giving me the idea about how things work in their countries. So this particular group was from Germany. And they told me about art conservation, and then I was really interested. And I came back to Delhi. There was no internet, good internet back then in Ladakh. So I came back to Delhi. I did some research, found out that you have National Museum Institute here that provides a master's course in art conservation. And then you have Delhi Institute of Heritage Research and Management in Delhi as well. So these are the two institutes which has a course in heritage conservation. And I was anyway in my third year, and then now suddenly I felt, okay, this really maybe this could be my calling, and I went for it. And then I realized how then everything that I saw as a kid, and all this process, I could make sense out of what was happening, this phenomena that was going on, how elements work together. And then the moment I got enrolled, I was like, okay, now I wish this master's course would finish as soon as possible, then I can go home and really can do something about it. Because that's not just one painting that has this problem going on, it's all over Ladakh. We have this expanse of the tourism. It has a very good, we have good impact of tourism, but at the same time it's really speeding up the process of how we are losing our actual cultural heritage. And then finally I felt that, I mean, this is what I needed to do, and yeah, I was going for it. In 2013, I got to work with one of the very good organizations called Art Conservation Solutions that were working in Ladakh, and that was sort of the first project on wall paintings, where I got to work with this very professional organization. And then there was this Achi association. And then I got introduced to so many organizations who were working in Ladakh. They were coming to Ladakh for more than 20 years, and they had been working in Ladakh for more than 20 years in the field of art conservation. And I had nobody in, when you talk to locals, not many people know that so many people are actually coming from abroad or from other parts of India and working in Ladakh. We as locals, we talk about our culture, we talk about heritage, but we have no idea what is going on really, because we are more, I mean, right now, suddenly, with the expanse of tourism, people are more interested in earning rather than, the focus is over there rather than preserving what our culture is. So then I realized the importance, I mean, how people outside of Ladakh, they are more, actually more aware, and they are really doing a lot of work to safeguard the cultural heritage of Ladakh. And then it felt like a responsibility too, that now that I'm a part of this small community that is over there, I have to do more. And my uh, my only problem was that all these organizations that were coming to Ladakh and working, they were very seasonal. They would only come during the summers. I mean, and for me as a, as a emerging conservator, for me it was very difficult because I was really dependent on projects that people were bringing from outside, the fundings that were sourced from outside. So me as a local, my problem was, yes, how do I make it more sustainable? How do I continue working in the field and not let it die? Because, you have to survive somehow. And this question of survival was coming. And that's how, I started my practice. It's called Shizrik Ladakh, which means Heritage Ladakh. But the help actually came from all these organizations who were working in Ladakh, because they also understood this importance, how locals should be a part of this big initiative that was going on. And so Achi Association is one of the organizations that has helped immensely to to restore, to start this practice. And when we talk about Tashi, he was talking about Old Town, and his space. Ladakh Art and Media Organization has a very wonderful, they have a wonderful space over there where they have restored a historic house. and they've turned it into a like space that is being used, adaptive reused as art gallery, their office, and exhibition space. Similarly, in 2017, I came across a very beautiful house, 200-year-old house in Old Town, and my immediate response to seeing that house was, I mean, this is where if I want a studio, this is where my studio should be. And I somehow managed to get in touch with the owners who had abandoned the house, and they were living somewhere else. But somehow nobody was there. There are many organizations. There is one particular organization called Tibet Heritage Fund, who have restored a lot of houses in Old Town, and they are using it as different spaces. And this particular house was somehow left out because there is the brother of the owner who's not very mentally stable, but he lives on the second floor of this house, so nobody was really daring to enter this space. But luckily, this family was ready to lease out the house, and I started the restoration work initially on my own, and then eventually a lot of people came together, and the German embassy has funded the project, and and through Achi Association we were able to restore the house completely, and now it has a nice exhibition space plus this restoration studio where we in-house we get a lot of Thangka paintings. So now I'll come to your point, where now you're saying now things are more established around around the profession that I'm working, and people the community, how they engage with it is that most of the projects that we work on, for example, if I have to go and work on a wall painting site, usually the minimum help, at least, that we get from the community is that because they want it, they had no idea that this profession exists. So I'll give you an example of this particular village called Phutuksar, and it has a 17th century temple that was abandoned by the villagers, and because the reason of abandonment was that the path was not very safe to climb anymore, and it was collapsing. And so they just left, and they built a new temple in the village itself, which is more accessible. Few years ago, they came to Achi Association, and they requested if something could be done over there. And immediately, some funds were arranged by Achi Association, and I led the project over there. And for them, now it was the youth association of that particular village that had come to to request if the restoration could be done, and which was taken very nicely, and the project was started, and the community. It was so good to see, because it does not happen very often where the community was coming together. So they had separate, split themselves into different groups. And each day, because there was a lot of architectural work to be done, architectural conservation work to be done, and these people would come every day, work as laborers, and do all the, there was one head mason, and they would, the mason would lead the work, but these villagers were coming together and helping. And now, finally, the work is at its final stages, and it was the community members and the conservators together that worked really hard to bring this back, bring the temple back to, to life. And now the villagers really want to, reuse the temple. They want to, consecrate the temple again, and then they want to reuse it, because they feel that this 17th century temple has a lot of significance, and now this realization is coming, this awareness is coming, which was not really that much, at least a decade ago, it wasn't there, but it's coming now. And to me, I'm very surprised to see most of the times that I work with, I deal with paintings that comes from the monasteries, but I also see now that since the space has been opened, it's a space that is open to public, a lot of people have, every house, at least every Buddhist household has Thangka paintings or different ritual objects. And they are very keen now that, and most of these are family heirlooms that has been passed on to them. And they are very keen to bring it to the studio. They want it to be conserved. They want to restore it. And to see this, because these are also coming from private homes now. So some accessibility has also been given to the people, which is very nice to see now that even private households are they have a lot, and now they're ready to sort of move to the next step where they're becoming very open to this profession and are ready to work with us. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's also wonderful to hear about this kind of conservation, community-led conservation, and also the kind of desire for it which is coming in from within the community. I don't know, Motup, I know you also did some work as a conservator, and I don't know how, is there something that it brought to your practice? And I mean, the need for such expertise, of course, but how did you look at it from a very, probably a different lens than how Noor is?
So when I returned back home, I think I was reading about this text by a French philosopher called William Flusser. He talks about a remigration and what it does and what kind of things you bring back when you come back and how you change. So one of my project was looking at the houses in my village in Nimu. I started documenting each and every house that was there, and I was thinking about how many houses were there before I left. So I was also quite interested in how houses were built. So then, in my while I was doing a little bit of research, I found out Archie does a lot of work to do with the house, and then I spoke to the director Bir, and he said, "Why don't you come in the summer and let's do?" So I just wanted to understand how houses were built in Leh and how it will lead me into my work. So I joined Archie and I was posted in Nubra for a month. There was one isolated monastery in the mountains, no light, you have to live on solar. And there was only one monk, me and the architect. So we lived there for a month long, went deeper into the research, went into each and every villages, did 50 plus interviews, bought a lot of stories, got to know a lot of things. And one instance, we were at the preliminary work at the Potoksar monastery. So literally, there is no road. It's just on the mountain, and at some point you could see a path, but then it's just steep. So some of us stayed away, and there was this one villagers and this foreigner who had to climb all these rocky mountains to get into the monastery. So yeah, that was my experience, and then from there I moved to Lamo, which is again a restored building, alternative space for exhibition. So did 2.5 years of work at Lamo, and yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this ties up quite nicely with this question of research, which I think is it's a big burning question in the art field. For example, now we're talking about artistic research and the way that, what are the ways in which artists might conduct research, which are of course, and what is also very important that comes out here is this kind of engagement and expertise as well, of the conservator, of the historian, of the researcher, the curator, I think, and the designer. So there is a value to that kind of deep engagement, that and then also thinking of it. I mean, it's also wonderful to think of a young practitioner being surrounded by all this kind of expertise, which is willingly being shared. Like even the way that Noor, you're sharing about the way that your whole practice kind of came into being. So there are these communities, and often we also think about regions are deprived, or only we sitting in Delhi, Bombay have access to scholarship, which is actually quite not true. But I really wanted maybe for you guys to tell us a little bit. Even Kriya, we were talking about the process of working with bamboo, and how through a material practice, and as you were talking about your material driven design in that sense, or material driven, maybe just reflecting on this question of artistic or creative research, and what that could entail, even I mean research that you're doing, um, any of you, maybe you can do a quick round of comments. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, research. In my field, like I didn't really have the time because I was also a mother at the time that when I started working with bamboo. And I was just talking to Mary actually a few days back about this oneness of how there is no differentiation between a work life and a personal life. It is in one. It filters into the other. It inspires the other. It distracts the other. It's all in this oneness that happens. So there's no work time and there is this no personal time. So I'm baking bread, I'm making rice and dal, I'm going and foraging for fern to make a salad, I'm also cutting bamboo, I'm doing everything in oneness. I'm taking my clothes that are drying on the clothesline, I'm doing everything. I'm speaking with my daughter who's suddenly seen some insect and wants me to see how beautiful it is and wants to borrow my phone to take a picture of it. Then there is also this thing that I'm constantly shifting between my workshop and my home, and suddenly there is this beautiful butterfly and I have to pause and stop everything I'm doing and just reflect and have that moment with it. So as for research, I haven't really had the time to read and to do extensive research on bamboo. So what I did was I said, let me just put my hands on this and see what happens. What happens if I put it in water? What happens if I boil it? What happens if I sun it? What happens if I air dry it? What happens if I smoke it? What kind of oils can I use? And I was always interested in this close loop of nature, you know, that my material is going to come from the earth and have a long life, because that's what I want to do. I want to give it a long life, that my products can go on to become heirlooms. I mean, at least I aspire that for them to become that. And that at the end, if you were to place it on the floor, on the forest floor, it can just go and become delicious nutrients. So keeping that as the base of my work, that anything that I use will not be chemical based. It will only be the elements of my surrounding space. And even the oil that I use at the end, that also has to be a food safe oil, just in case somebody wants to use it in contact with food, that my daughter can actually put it in her mouth and I don't have to be afraid of it. So all this is just, you know, it's hands-on. It's like day to day. I don't say that I have, I already know bamboo. I still don't know a lot about it. I am figuring out every day, like when I go to my studio space, the way I look at it, the forms of, it's also the way it's stacked. It's stacked in a certain way, and the way I see it from where I'm standing, I see something else in it. So one day I'll be fascinated by the node, another day I'll be fascinated by the thickness of a particular kind of bamboo. So I just explore this on a day-to-day basis. So that's why also my pieces end up being very limited editions. I don't do like quantities, because I want to continuously explore the material. And I think that that's what allows me, that if I don't do the same thing again and again, I don't get stuck in that. And by exploring, I get to know the material and also get to know how I can work with it. And there's one more thing that I just wanted to add also about the memory of the body, which I have just had this opportunity to also work, which I should mention, with Dada, my fellow artisan whom I worked with and whom I'm working with for the past 7 years. This body of work that you see here is actually a relationship that I have with this wonderful person, who was just a boy actually, who was working with in my parents' farmland. He was there to just clean the forest and help with day-to-day work at the farm. And I just told my mom that, you know, I'm working with bamboo and I need somebody, if there's somebody you can, you know, spare. So she's like, no, I can't. But I said, you know, I have a way of charming her and fighting with her and getting what I want. So I think this work that you see is also like how a designer has worked with an artisan, you know, like, and how his knowledge, like he didn't have any learned knowledge of bamboo craft as such, but bamboo, as I said, is part of life in Northeast. They know how to cut it. They know how to use it for fencing, for construction, for everything, for agriculture, for everything. It's there in all forms. So seeing him work with it, seeing his body knowledge of it and how he sits and holds it and cuts it, and this entire movement and of transferring this energy that we have from our body into the material, and then this material becoming this product. So what you see out there is actually not just something that is static, you know, it's got so much of us, our emotions, like a particular day when we made that piece, what must have been going through our mind, you know, the sound of children playing in the background, the bird songs, the cicadas, the rustling of the leaves. I mean, all that, I think that's the story, and that's what I want to portray in my work. I don't want that my designs should stand out, but I want this material to shine through, and I want to be a voice for this material and for many, many more materials probably that I will explore as I go. Thank you.
So, talking about research, incidentally, while we are having this interaction here, I have a team working in Nubra Valley. A research team which has just started working there, started on a project called Mapping of Cultural Heritage of Nubra Valley in the Siachen Belt, you know, the Silk Route part. So I think, in the past also we have been we are engaged into some series of similar sort of interactions with the communities also, at the level of, different levels, school and different age groups. So wherein we place very, much importance to research. Something which is missing in the school education system also, especially the kind of research to understand their own surroundings, for example. So in this recent workshop that we did in Chumatang village school, what we did was we got the village elders, knowledgeable people and other people, to come to the school and talk to the students of that village itself, and have this interaction between them about understanding the village itself. So we took them for water walk, for example. We took them to the head water, and from there we did this walk through the village to understand the water system, distribution system, for example. So in this 1 or 2 days exercise itself, there was so much revelations to the students, and also, elders also learned because in this today, what in the age of technology and other changes that we see around, the last time that we did this cultural mapping of Changthang region, what we realized is there's this sort of a gap which is developing between different generations, like younger and older people. They're sort of complaining each other. They think, they're not giving much importance to us, respect and all so forth. So we thought, of this kind of a workshop wherein we can bring them together to interact and talk about their culture, heritage and so forth. So research, I think, is one very important, very interesting way to get to not only to understand their own heritage and the cultural, heritage, but also to bridge this gap which is developing among generations. Somehow this gap is being taken by technologies like mobile sets. So, just before coming to this exhibition here from Leh, we did a 1 week workshop on research methodology with this team that we have prepared for the Nubra Heritage Mapping team. So one of the resource persons is also here, Radhika Gupta, and we have had different resource people, interesting people who were luckily in the Leh town around, So we got in touch with them and requested them to come and share their expertise and knowledge with the team. And of course, we were lucky to have really important people in their field, their areas. For example, we had a cultural historian, quite renowned person. His name is John Vincent Blazer. And then we also had other people, and of course, Radhika was also there, and giving different perspective of research. Research is a multi-distinct approach, a disciplinary approach. Not just if you're mapping heritage, not just the history part of it, but the whole approach that we have put into Nubra exercise is to look at the stories of Nubra, not just from heritage point of view, but also anthropological, which Radhika very beautifully sort of explained the team, and they really are very after the workshop, they got really such charged and motivated, and they went there. They're continuing this exercise in Nubra Valley. So research, I think, places in today's scenario of so drastic changes that are taking place around us. So research is one thing that can help bring us back to our roots, to understand our roots, identity. All this have become really important in such, you know, political shifts, paradigm shifts, which we are witnessing today. So I think research is really, really important. Yeah.
May I? To this, I think I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate here. This idea of artists' interventions in research. I remember when I came across the work of Professor Ganesh Devi many, many years ago in Arunachal, in the Northeast, his first place that he worked in, he is a language expert. And this sentence that he said, I think it was 10, 12 years ago when I first came across him and his work, that he was actually mapping the languages that had died in Arunachal Pradesh. And he said that when a language dies, an entire culture dies with it. It's not just a language. And it really struck me this. And I began to actually look at, when we say research, it's also that we're looking, the term itself is a very Western education lens. And when we look at like our indigenous ways from our culture, um, what are we searching? Like the question that I would ask is why? uh, why do we want to, is there a word for saying research? And actually this is something I have done in quite a few languages, like including my mother tongue. There is no word for research. There is a word for search. There is a word for searching again, but there is no word for research. And I think that maybe one of the big gaps in how our indigenous cultures are being documented is the fact that there are academics from our own region, from our own cultures, who are researching our own cultures, and yet I wonder how it's filtering through. If when you're looking at just a plain act of translation, like all I've done many projects which are to do with translation across many languages across South Asia. There was this very big 5-year program with the Goethe Institute that I did, which was all of the countries of South Asia with German. And I still remember, at this lunch, like these poets, so it was poets translating each other's languages, of which that was the first time I met Yawan about 10 years ago, and we had Nepali, Mizo, Tamil, Malayali, Kannada. Like, it was just like a rich repository of poetry and languages. And then there were the German poets. And I remember this Nepali poet just stood up in the middle of lunch. We were all like having fun. And he was like, "What? Are you telling me that in Germany there's only one language?" Like, it was unfathomable for him from this region to think that an entire country had one language only. And it was like quite a moment, actually, for all of us. And I think all I've learned through all of the work that I've done in literary translations is actually what is this fact that we have to acknowledge that there will always be gaps in how we're understanding. It's not so much, yes, it is important to be able to translate, but it's also that one has to always be humble about the fact that there will be things that are untranslatable. And therefore, also with our culture, like with so much of our indigenous cultures, there is so much that cannot be articulated in the Western ways in which we have learned how to research and document. And I think maybe perhaps that, there is the methodology that is learned through Western education. And is there a way that we can collaborate? Also with this project where travelers are going to visit these different communities and they're going to document them, it worries me. It worries me because I feel is it enough? It's good to have a start, but sometimes we can't only be grateful with the little that is being done. We must ask for more. We must set standards for much more. And so, for me, like the way I see this idea of documenting, of telling stories, the first act is listening. And to be able to listen, you really have to be able to like open up all of, because the way in which we tell our stories, like a lot of us live our cultures, is like it's all of our sights, so it was so important to taste yesterday. It's so important to like look up at a mountain and feel breathless and wordless. All of these ways in which, like we use all of our lenses to actually try and understand and grasp a little meaning of that full meaning, which can only be perhaps felt or understood within that context of which we can only be visitors. So, yes, I think like in all of these ways, I think of research, and it's only always for me like a question, why? And then how will we do it, and how can there be many collaborators in this way that we are documenting stories and different kinds of truths and perspectives.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a lot of artistic research is also questioning research itself. And I don't know, Motup, if you have anything you want to add to that, just in the way that you
Yeah.
might think of research.
So I never knew what research was and what is how do you approach when you are on the field. How do you approach via research methodologies or so on? So for me, I was very selfish. I wanted to know more about what I wanted to know. I wanted to understand borderlands. I wanted to understand certain materials for which there were a lot of offers from these researchers saying that, will you come with me to Nubra? Will you help me in research? And I would say yes, only because if I have something to gain from it. And it's a long research project, like 10, 15 days, months. So within that, they are very like they are experts. They have been doing that for such a long time, and they have got a huge knowledge about what they do. So within that, I channel my own questions from them because we are together for a longer time, and then I keep asking, I keep bothering them. What do you think about that? What do you think about these? What do you think about certain identities and so on? So that way, I think I get my answer, and that way I help them in translation. And I think my part of research is half done or something like that. So so I keep doing that, and then meanwhile, then I start understanding how one conducts a research, and there are in certain ways there are certain methodologies, in certain ways there are questionnaires that has been created, and there is the level of ethics that one goes while doing a research and so on. And at the end, what do you do with the materials? Do you share with someone, or what do you do, or how do you dispose them, and stuff like that? I've been learning in the process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can carry on. And thank you, Mary. I think those are very important points to signpost and to think about, especially as we also embark on this project. Royal Enfield and UNESCO embark on this project. Perhaps if there are any audience questions, Dipankar, do you want to share something about research? Because there is something very, I mean, like Kriya was sharing, there's a kind of process, a collaborative process of actually working on material, and thinking through the material, and also kind of bringing it into something which may necessarily not look like, uh, you know, a and appearances are deceptive. It doesn't look exactly like something as a very traditional textile. There's an intervention which is very starkly present in the materials that you've used and in the kind of. So I don't know if you wanted to share something about this, because I know it's been a long process of you working with the community, which you are also part of.
हाँ, मेरा इतना मतलब सोशल के सामने बोलने का आदत नहीं है, तो फिर भी मतलब प्रिपेयर भी नहीं था। तो बेसिकली मेरा अपना काम पे मतलब एक्चुअली जब मैंने शांति निकेतन में मतलब पढ़ाई के लिए गया था तो पेंटिंग पे, तो उससे पहले जब मैं गांव में था और फिर उनके उसके बाद जब शांति निकेतन में सीखा। तो उसका मतलब घर लौटने के बाद थोड़ा सेम चीज़ ही था, लेकिन मतलब पर्सपेक्टिव थोड़ा डिफरेंट था। तो जैसे कि मैंने रिसाइकल आर्ट पे फोकस किया था, करने के बाद जब घर लौटा फिर उनके साथ जैसे कि रिसाइकल के साथ मतलब जो मतलब एनवायरमेंटल इशू, फिर उसके बाद घर पे लौटने के बाद जब हम अपना कम्युनिटी को देखा कि मतलब कैसे कंज्यूम कर रहा है, मतलब कोई कोई कल्चरल पे मतलब ट्रेडिशन पे डिफरेंस आ रहा है। मतलब मैं उधर अपना कम्युनिटी से भी एक पार्ट हो और एक आर्टिस्ट का भी मतलब पार्ट हो। तो मेरे लिए ऑब्जर्वेशन बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट था, क्योंकि एक्सपीरियंस भी उधर था, दोनों तरफ से ही था। तो ज़्यादातर मैंने देखा और फिर ऑब्जर्व किया और अपने ही उधर का एक पार्ट हो, तो उसके हिसाब से मतलब अनुभव ज़्यादा हुआ कि उधर मतलब एक्चुअली कैसा मतलब सिचुएशन है, उसके साथ कैसे हम एक आर्टिस्टिक इंटरवेंशन करना है, जहाँ पे उनसे भी सीख सकूँ। रिसर्च के पार्ट में उधर काम के प्रोजेक्ट के साथ मतलब ऐसा नहीं कि हम सब कुछ जानते हैं, क्योंकि कम्युनिटी से भी बहुत कुछ सीखना है, क्योंकि बहुत सालों जुड़ के एक कम्युनिटी मतलब बनता है, जहाँ पे एक अपना भाषा, अपना लैंग्वेज, कल्चर, कॉस्ट्यूम, एवरीथिंग मतलब। तो वो सब ऑब्जर्वेशन के बाद जो एक कम्युनिटी का प्रैक्टिस जब एक मतलब खोने जाता है, तो उसको मतलब कैसे कंटेम्पोरेरी सिचुएशन के साथ डील करना है। अदरवाइज मतलब वो कम्युनिटी का जो मतलब सिस्टम है वो मतलब प्रेजेंट टाइम के साथ इम्पोर्टेंट नहीं होने से वो एक ट्रेडिशन भी लुप्त हो जाता है। तो वो जो दो ब्रिज है, तो उनके साथ कैसे मुझे एक कम्युनिटी के अंडरस्टैंडिंग के हिसाब से मुझे डील करना है, तो उस हिसाब से इंटरवेंशन करके मतलब उन लोगों के साथ जुड़ के मतलब कोलैबोरेटिव एक मतलब प्रोसेस पे गए।
Any questions from the audience to all these lovely panelists?
While I was listening to all of you, one of the things that struck me is you're talking about art, expression, research, and a lot of what you're dealing with is really intangible. Every time I visit your place as a traveler, I'm traveling as an outsider. How do you want me to approach that heritage? How do you want me to interact with the art, with the conservation work, with the heritage? How do you want me to see it? Because I'm going to take it back with me and tell the rest of the world what I've seen, right? So how does that relationship work?
Well, first of all, I would say with respect, because that is something that lacks, especially with tourists. You know, they come to a place like Ladakh or Northeast. I will give examples of my place. A lot of travelers, tourists come. Travelers, yes, most of them, they are more aware. But a lot of tourists who come, you know, they come for a few days. They want to do everything in those few days. They do not respect the culture. They do not show a lot of respect to the people. You know, just because they pay money to go somewhere, you know, they treat the people and the culture like trash. So this is something that is very sad to see. I've also seen, you know, examples where, especially with the material cultural heritage, you know, somebody comes, you know, just like likes to leave a mark behind. It's not a very nice thing to do, and this is very sad to see. And I think, you know, you have to give time. You can't come and do everything in, like, you know, 4 or 5 days. You have to give time to that place. So somebody comes to Ladakh, you know, and they want to learn, like, you know about the place, go everywhere, you know, like go to all the touristy places. But then, you know, they are also going to all these monasteries and like all these places. But how much are you learning about that place? How much time are you giving to that place? Because I think that is lacking. If you really want to understand, then you have to give time. You have to give time to understand the space. Ladakh is not just about, you know, whenever somebody comes to Ladakh, the first thing they want to do is go to Pangong Lake or to go to Nubra Valley to ride on the camels. But Ladakh is so much more than that. And it's very disappointing to see people spend so much of money and take back such less, because there is so much to offer. And there is a certain way of living that people are used to. You have to respect it, and you have to do some research again before coming to a place like that. You have to know where you're going. You can't just see some reels on Instagram and then just go to that place. You have to see, really know about the space, because research part is lacking again there. People come unaware where they are, where they're supposed to. The first thing that, just a small thing, makes a huge difference. Somebody who is to come to Ladakh, the first thing that anybody tells you is to get acclimatized. People come, straight away, they want to go to the highest pass in the world. You don't do that, and then when you tell the person that you're not supposed to do that, it just they get annoyed, and sometimes so yeah, I'm fine, but then something will happen, and then the rest of the people, the locals, have to take care of the situation. So it's just, I think, yeah, more respect and more time.
I would like to add a little bit to what Nouri's just said. That of course, anywhere you go, you have certain do's and don'ts, so that you generally people are should be and must be aware of. But more than that, I would say, actively engage with the people. They're also people. I mean, wherever we go, we are all in the same sailing in the same boat. We are all experiencing the same experiences. So actively engaging and listening to them, and also sharing your whatever experiences, your opinions, ideas. So that would then make you feel at home also wherever you go. So that kind of an engagement somehow, I've been in the tourism field for so many years, so what I generally observe and kind of feel that, if that interaction was a little bit more interesting, just come and go and see some places, not talking to the people much, or not really interested to listen to the people, that somehow becomes little uninteresting. Also, then in that way, then you can also have better experience, memories to cherish afterward.
I have something to add as well. This comes from my personal experience with the forest, and I'm always expressing my gratitude for it. I mean, I don't know if it's listening to me. I have a feeling that the forest is listening to me, and I am saying thank you to it every single day. Every day the sunrise, every day the clouds, the greens, the sounds. And I think that can also, something with travel as well. Like when we go to a space, we have to express our gratitude to people and to the spaces that we visit. Not necessarily by just thank you, but by our body language, by the way we engage with them, and to make just them feel comfortable. And also, like he was talking about interaction, I think interactions also has to be done in a way where we don't cross the line of curiosity and get personal also, because then it starts making people feel very uncomfortable. Because I also run a homestay with my mom, so sometimes when people ask me some very personal questions, I don't like that, because I'm not a thing for you to know. I am a person just like you, And I would also like that you would tell me a little bit about yourself, about what you think of what you've seen, rather than just questioning everything about my culture, about the food I eat, about how do I live in this forest, don't I get bored, all these kind of things. So I think we have to be very careful. And careful, I mean, of course we have to be natural. There's no set rule as how you would be when you go and visit a place, but just gentle, gentle and slow, and with a lot of gratitude, with just body language also helps a lot, I think. Thank you.
I think I'm going to set off from where Cami went off, which is that, first of all, for the region that we come from, it's also something that we ourselves have to remind ourselves about. There is no such place as the Northeast, like a generic Northeast. There really isn't. Each state is really different, and within each state, there are so many variations. And I think like an open mind would be great. That we have so many preconceived notions about our region, right? That people should look a certain way, or they talk a certain way, or that we wear. I think someone asked me the other day about the costumes that we wear, and I was like, oh really, what costumes do you wear? So it's like there are so many preconceived notions, and I think that it's also, we have a history to deal with here. Like my state is celebrating 25 years, 50 years this year. So we are just at that stage really where we're maturing. We've had a lot of baggage where, the rest of India has gone forward because there was such a thing as the frontier policy for entire region, where it was sort of, locked off from the rest of the country post-independence. So we're having to deal with a lot of sort of things that we have to explain ourselves a lot. And in the last year, I've been settled in Shillong and I've not been in India, in Delhi. I realized that coming back this time, back to Delhi after a year, I suddenly realized, I'm so chilled at the moment because I haven't been asked for 1 year, where are you from? I've lived in Delhi for more than 20 years, and almost every week there is this question of where you from, because I'm from this country too, and Delhi belongs to me as much as, in fact, I think of myself as pretty much very North Indian more than, Northeastern. I'm very talkative. I'm slightly naughty, like, but I think I got that from the Punjabis. Yeah. And, so there's all of these things. So I just think like an open mind and an idea that there is no generic, like one identity for our region. I think that, there is a lot that we share also in terms of how we are mistaken for each other. And, Ladakh, I don't know much about Ladakh, and it is not the same, right? I mean, there are similarities. I think there is like in some ways, I feel that when we meet each other, and actually when I meet, First Nations people, Indigenous people from anywhere in the world, there is, there is an understanding that we have with each other, which is so beautiful. And I think that is to do with actually the fact that we do not see our practice, we do not see the objects that we create as different from like the rest of the cycle of life. And it took me many, many years to actually really understand this. And when I was at these conferences, of indigenous peoples, that's when I realized, oh my God, there's so much that we share. And so, like, similarly, we would like when people come to us, that you're not just coming, you're not traveling to us, but you're really, really journeying to the space, the land, the people.
I think it's been a very rich session, and it's just wonderful to see all the work that you're all doing. I'm so happy that I got a chance to. I mean, Mary, I know, Motup, I know a little bit, but the rest I met for the first time, and also reconnecting with the people that I do know. And I think there are a lot of things that have been discussed. I think the ways that each of you is sort of intervening, working. There are not like one way of thinking about culture. It's extremely dynamic. It's something that people are engaging with and talking to in different ways, and are also kind of bringing back those questions to their own regions. The way that Tashi was talking about, also the idea of research, which is actually being spoken within the community with the children of. Yesterday also Fayaz was talking about that when he asked the question about education, because so much of this research, where does it go, and if it's kind of channeled back into a community, sometimes think there are a lot of missing links as well, and those links some people are putting together because they are thinking in those reflective and creative ways. Others are not getting the opportunity because they are burdened by so many questions. So these processes become very important and dynamic, and they have a lot of resonance for us today within our own regions for us to share. And I really think this platform is wonderful because uh, you know like Mary said, these are such dynamic and complex regions. They're not the Himalayas is of course not one. None of us would even the stupidest would not think that. But I don't know how does one actually navigate through this, and it can only be done together. So I'm really happy for this opportunity and look forward to this platform growing further. And thank you all for being with us. Thank you so much, panelists, for being with us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much, people.